All right. Yeah, go ahead and hit slideshow, and then there you go. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So hello, friends. Good evening and welcome to History Happy Hour. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Indiana. My name is Lauren Pichtel, and I am the manager of Family History and Cultural Programs at the Indiana Historical Society. It's great to see so many of you here tonight. This happy hour is brought to you with support from Lake City Bank, offering online banking, mobile banking, and actual go-in-the-branch banking. Drop in at lakecitybank.com. And today is also supported by the Robin and Charlito Winston Family Fund for African American History. At the Indiana Historical Society, we are Indiana's storyteller, connecting people to the past. We do this by collecting millions upon millions of pieces of paper that tell Indiana's unique stories, things like books, paintings, letters, photographs, diaries, maps, etc., and finding intriguing and unexpected ways to share and remember the past, whether that be through publications, exhibitions, or events like this today. It is through these pieces that we tell the diverse, unconventional, even saucy stories of Indiana, and to inspire a future grounded in our state's uniting values and principles. So today, we're here to celebrate the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., leading up to Monday's federal holiday commemorating Dr. King's birthday. If you're local, consider coming downtown and joining us Monday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. as we explore the power of music associated with the civil rights movement. Admission is free, but we'd really like you to purchase some or sign up for advance tickets. Before I introduce Susan and get started with this evening, I have a few pieces of logistics. For this event, Susan will chat for about 35-40 minutes, and then we'll open it up to all of your questions. If you have questions as we go along, please drop it in the question and answer section. We'll keep an eye on them and then pepper them in as we get to the second half of this evening. Right now, you've all been muted, but we do want to hear your thoughts by adding comments to the chat box as we go. Make sure you are replying to panelists and attendees so everyone can see your reply, not just Susan and myself. Also, keep an eye on it for links and URLs. Don't worry if you missed one. Most of the links will also be delivered in your inbox in a follow-up email tomorrow morning. This program is being recorded. You can catch the replay on our website, indianahistory.org, in the upcoming week. If you enjoy this program, please consider coming back for more. We have more History Happy Hours coming to you soon. Join us on February 18th as we look at Black literature with Nichelle Hayes from the Center for Black Literature and Culture at the Indianapolis Public Library. Sign up for that at indianahistory.org for more information about this and other virtual offerings coming to an internet-connected device near you. And on February 6th, we are also coming together for Indiana Historical Society's Research Roundtable, where we're going to talk about how Black history is everyone's history. So come join that conversation as well. So without further ado, let me toss this over to Susan Hall Dodson, Coordinator of African American Collections at the Indiana Historical Society. So Susan, what are you enjoying for this birthday celebration History Happy Hour?
As many of you know, when we do a History Happy Hour, we have libations. But since I'm still in my office, I'm drinking water, but from my Princess Queen cup in celebration of a king, because today is a birthday celebration, a life celebration, not a death celebration. So we will encourage you to imbibe and to celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, cheers. So I want to start off with a question for Susan that here's some pointers on the chats and Q&A for all of you. Just to keep in mind as we move forward, and you want to drop in your comments and questions. And so today we're celebrating Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King a few days ahead, or King Jr., a few days ahead of Monday's federal holiday. So why is celebrating Dr. King's birthday so important to have a federal holiday created? And what is Indiana's role, if any, in supporting the creation of this federal holiday?
Well, Dr. King's birthday celebration and its connection to Indiana is an important one. Members in Indiana, council members that you see on this screen, were friends, were colleagues, were supporters of Dr. King's. This picture represents city county council members who were in support of legislation early on to rename Martindale Avenue from 16th Street to 34th Street to Martin Luther King Drive. And this picture was from 1984. This is a picture from 1983, where the Indianapolis Education Association, Martin Luther King Jr. Human Rights Committee, their annual human rights dinner, and their awardees. So organizations and individuals in Indianapolis were working hard to keep his legacy and keep his life work going. And here goes one of my favorite people here in Indianapolis, Pat Brown, who's now known as Pat Payne, who was the president of that organization, IEA, along with the keynote speaker, Dr. Arthur Thomas. And this is in 1983. And in 1985, Martin Luther King Day Jr. celebration at school number 69, where these students were creating artwork, singing songs. But it all happened because there were at least three other attempts to create a holiday, a national holiday. But the one that was successful was spearheaded by Indiana's own Congresswoman Katie Hall out of Gary, Indiana. And she pushed and pushed and pushed until finally all states came in line to sign this bill into a national holiday. And it's not on his birthday. It is a floating Monday holiday. There was a lot of concern in government about the cost of making another Monday holiday and things of that nature. So it floats to the third Monday of January, but his actual birthday is tomorrow, January 15th, 9th. He was born in 1929. And so here we see, as part of our collection, is President Ronald Reagan signing the bill to create the national holiday. But why is it all important?
Yeah, I was
What's
just
so
about
important?
to. I was just about to jump in and say how great Dr. Payne is. We've had her here for an event last year, or in 2019 now, and she was super awesome. And I about the importance of Dr. King, and so we're gonna talk about why it was so important for the U.S. to have a federal holiday and around his birthday and not any other day associated with Dr. King.
Well, at the time in 1983, there were no holidays in the United States that celebrated on a national scale the life, the work of any African American. Emancipation Day, which we now refer to more often as Juneteenth, is not a national holiday, although recognized throughout the country. And I think now it's up to about 40 odd states that at least recognize that as a day. But he was assassinated for his work, his nonviolent work to help and get African Americans in particular, initially, to have freedoms and to become full citizens in the United States. But he also was a regular person like everybody else. He was a husband. He was a scholar. He attended Morehouse College and he has a PhD from Boston University. He's a father, and these are his children. Dexter, Yolanda, Martin, Bernice, and Martin III. He was an activist, an organizer. He put himself out front, but as you see in this picture, along with his wife, along with Reverend Abernathy, the late John Lewis, the late Bayard Rustin, and everyday individuals, and the sung and the unsung, work with him to what? To strive for freedom and rights for Blacks in America. And this picture is right here is taken from the last leg of the march in Selma, Alabama in 1965. He also was a great orator. And yes, we tend to focus on the I Have a Dream speech and the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. But so many people participated, as you could see in this program. There was an appeal from leaders other than, in addition to Dr. King, to ask for this, to fight for this, to stand up for civil rights laws, for voting, for work, integrated education, equitable education in America. So these are some of the reasons. 250,000 people came to Washington, D.C. on August 28, 1963, to hear Dr. King, along with 15 other speakers, well-known singers like Mahalia Jackson, Marian Anderson, Joan Baez, entertainers, scholars. My father was in attendance, to hear him speak, to encourage Black people, but encourage legislators, white people, to create equitable systems in America to people who have been here since the dawn of this nation. He met with the Attorney General, his brother, the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. Here he is in meetings with President Lyndon Johnson. And in addition to all of that, he traveled the world as a speaker, as an organizer, and for his work of nonviolence and his writings, of which he published numerous books as well as speeches. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo, Norway in 1964. So these are just some of the reasons why we choose and we fought and we pushed to have a day of remembrance and reckoning and celebration of a life well lived, for a cause worthy of attention and time, and still we struggle and still we march.
So as we move forward in celebrating the life and legacy of Dr. King, talk to us a bit about King's connection to Indiana and how much or how often did he actually visit here?
King was a good friend of Indiana, and he had numerous friends in Indiana, but he didn't spend a lot of time in Indiana. There are only so many hours in a day and days in a week, and his travelogue, for those who'd like to see it, is unfortunately not available here at the Indiana Historical Society, but Stanford University has his travelogue, and it's fascinating to see where he was and where he was going day after day, doing speeches, having meetings, doing personal addresses to small groups and large auditoriums. So the main work that he was doing was within the South, particularly, as you saw the images from Selma, Montgomery, Albany, Georgia. But he came here just the same, because during this time, segregation was still prevalent all throughout the nation. I say from sea to shining sea. So he was encouraged to come, invited by many, and in some cases discouraged by others not to come to Indiana. But indeed he did. So in 1958, one of his first trips, early trips, here he is being greeted at the airport by one of his very good friends and fellow clergy, Reverend Andrew Brown. And while he was here, we think about the time. I must oftentimes have to remind young people, there were wheels on buses, there weren't dinosaurs, and he was at the airport. And there he was greeted by a contingent of well-wishers, supporters, clergy, legislators, both Black and white. And the occasion for his visit was actually to go to the Senate Young Christians Leadership Organization, better known as the YMCA, for a monster meeting. And it was held, there were over 4,000 people, and it was at Cato Tabernacle. And it wasn't because it wasn't a religious event that was there. That space was rented out at the time in lieu of a convention center. And it was one of the largest environments and venues to hold a crowd of that size. And here he is with individuals representing the YMCA. But he also went to Gary. Gary was a place that he went to, I think, more often than he came to Indianapolis. And here he is preparing for a speech in Gary. He spent a lot of time in Chicago, and Chicago's proximity to Gary also helped push that. A very large African-American contingency in its citizens. And this is pre the election of Richard Hatcher. So here he's receiving the key to the city from Gary's mayor, George Chakiris. So he was invited, revered by many. Here he is with other clergy, Reverend Richard O'Bass, the mayor, and Reverend Julius James. And this is in 1962. Another visit. Now, his visits with Reverend Andrew Brown, as shared to me by his son, Reverend Tommy Brown, was oftentimes not publicized and not for an event, but to come visit a friend and come and have respite and come and have conversation and care with other like-minded individuals away from the spotlight. And so oftentimes he was here and people didn't know about it. But here he's at Mount Zion Baptist Church, and he is with his soldier in the struggle, Reverend Abernathy and Reverend Brown. He was in Danville at an NAACP meeting. He was at Goshen College, and the subject, as it says here, the future of integration. And that was in 1960. These are some early visits into Indiana, and not just say latter visits after, say, the March on Washington. And people lined up, both Black and white, to come and hear him speak in the cold. Here he is at Notre Dame. But his last speaking engagement at a collegiate venue was Manchester College, now known as Manchester University. And he is with the president of the university. And people and students are out in the rain. They came to come and hear him speak. And during this time, he did not know, that was February of 1968, that his days on this earth as a speaker, as a leader, as a father, as a husband would be limited, as he was assassinated, sadly, in Memphis on April 4th, 1968, at the Lorraine Motel. And here he is lying in state at a funeral home in Memphis on April 5th, surrounded by his, as you see, very young children. His funeral was then in Atlanta, Georgia, and he was buried. Then there was an open air public service at Morehouse College, and he was originally buried in a cemetery in Atlanta, but he is now buried along with Coretta Scott King across the street from the King Center in Auburn, in Atlanta, Georgia. So we celebrate a life well lived, his influence in Indiana and throughout Indianapolis remains today. And so, as a birthday celebration, he was here not as much as maybe we would like as we look back in the historical record, in the Wayback Machine. And there's lots of reasons for that. He had other work to do in places that were more critical to the movement in the South, but he was traveling abroad. He was in the UK, he was in Paris, he was in India, as well as throughout the United States. In a short period of time, I would say from 1954 until he died 1968. Let's see, do we have any questions?
I have a couple questions that I'll shoot your direction.
Okay.
And then one of our background people is also filtering them to me too. But one question we have is, it sounds like Dr. King spoke at a lot of colleges and universities, not just some in Indiana, but obviously all over the place. And so how were those speaking engagement how were they organized? Myself, I'm a public programmer here at IHS, and I keep thinking about all the logistics of getting a speaker to come, and how engaged were those students and audiences, or was it all the community coming to his speeches at the universities? Just how did that jive?
Well, from my research, he was in Bloomington, but he wasn't at Bloomington as an event for IU and for students. He was there. It was a venue that someone else booked out to have him come and speak. So it depends on the venue and the time. And somebody mentioned in the chat, could you find some of these things in the travelogue? Some of the entries are more detailed than others. And then you can go do news searches to find the articles that may have come out prior to, or ones that came out immediately following, why he was there, who he was invited by. And if you think about within your question was, how were they organized? So it depends on whose venue and event it was. In the beginning, in the early days, it didn't necessarily have the same level of, say, security that we might think would happen. So depends on how good they were. So 4,000 people came for the monster meetings, which is not unusual to the organizers of the local YMCA, the Senate Avenue YMCA, to have these meetings. They had been doing them quite some time. So they were well versed in how to do that. He spoke, I come from a archive in Cleveland, where he spent a lot of time in Cleveland because one of his nearest, dearest friends was the father of my college roommate. And they were roommates in college at Boston University, as well as fraternity brothers in Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And he came there. He was friends with a number of clergy, so they invited them. And those same flyers that we were just looking at, there were numerous ones where he was coming to speak at local Black churches, and then held big rallies out in parking lots. They have a supermarket where you can see the big sign outside. So people were following him. And his following was continually growing over the years. So it didn't start that way, but it wasn't just about him. You've got the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and people who were organizing on his behalf, and he was the speaker and not necessarily the organizer in every state around the country.
Awesome. Thanks for answering that question. So another question that we have from our awesome audience is um, just a question about what did he speak about when he visited Manchester College in North Manchester, Indiana? Do you know
I
anything about
don't
that?
know what the topic was. Off the top of my head, I don't recall what the topic was of that speech. Given that it was 1968 and to as his own um, thought processes and things he was advocating was changing, I'm making an assumption without having facts in front of me that his message was starting to move into equity for jobs for all people, not just for Black people. And the Vietnam War, being very much outspoken at that time about being against the Vietnam War and the Poor People's March and how to eradicate poverty in the United States. So I would imagine at that point in February 1968, that was a lot of what he was talking about, not just civil rights for Black people. This is also post the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 64 and 65. So was everything perfect and equitable? No, but he was also moving his message mainstream for those who are disenfranchised in other ways.
Awesome. That's a great answer because we don't always know what might not have the speech that someone wrote down verbatim to know what
Hmm.
someone talked about. But to the individual who asked that question, we are historians and we certainly encourage you to check out the newspapers up in North Manchester and see if how people were responding the day after that speech happened and see if you can gather more clues from that. Going in
Yeah, I
line,
see one of the questions before we go on. One of the questions in the chat talks about would uh, a speech he did at a college in the New York Finger Lakes, would it be listed in the travelogue? Probably, possibly. And yes, I found them all accessible online as far as what was in that travelogue.
so one of our guests asked during this time of giving speeches, whether it was the speech at Manchester or other times, just kind of trying to understand more about what his popularity was at the time, and that's thinking in the way that the they said we see him now as a hero, but he was deeply disliked by mainstream white people then. So what was just a comment about his popularity, I guess.
Well, his popularity ebbed and flowed. I mean, there were many African Americans initially as he was emerging who were not necessarily fans, or they were afraid to stand too close to the nonviolent protest movement, particularly in the Deep South, how to push through um, and risk life and limb and livelihoods. But the same was happening on the East Coast. He was very young. You know, when he was assassinated in 1968, he was only 39 years old. So he was not the first orator. He was not the first pastor. He was not the first leader of the modern civil rights movement. So you had people like Reverend Shuttlesworth, Wyatt T. Walker, a whole host of others that were doing the hard work. Ella Baker, SCLC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinate, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, wasn't founded and formed by him. The NAACP was not founded and formed by him. So you had W.E.B. Du Bois, you had Roy Wilkins, and you had other organizations and other leaders. So there was some resistance to him, particularly when as a young man coming in. And he was very charismatic, very educated, and an orator. And it's not that he didn't put in the time of the hard work, but for some, like, who are you and where'd you come from at this point? But then he did have a following. He could, via his chutzpah, his charisma, lead people to follow. But to lead people to follow in a bigger organization, not just he as, ironically, his name is King, but he is the king and the only one making decisions. Because A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin, they had already started working on the March on Washington, and it was supposed to be in the 40s. And in their discussions with the then president, I want to say it was into the 50s, it was Truman, decided we should wait. We'll pause on doing this. But Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph were really the architects, if you will, of that march, and making it happen. And there were lots of people and lots of bodies.
So we have one question. There's a couple questions that fall in line with this topic, but I want to focus on celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King. So I'm just going to ask one. But with the terrible legacy of Indiana having the highest number of KKK grand wizards, did Dr. King ever speak and or march to protest the influence of the KKK on Indiana politics?
Not that I'm aware of. Okay. As a march, as a thing. Not to my knowledge, he did not do that. Did he speak out against the Klan? But I don't know that it was as the Klan targeted, because particularly we get comfortable by saying it was the Klan, but it wasn't just the Klan. There were Klan and there were Klan sympathizers. And as we learned in Dr. James Madison's book about the Klan, particularly in Indiana, like in the 1920s, that was not their only target, but that was not the only people to fear as far as retribution, discrimination in Indiana. It was also people and legislators who weren't card-carrying members, who didn't pay their dues, that didn't participate in their marches, but didn't make them any less discriminatory, bigoted, and dangerous and to day-to-day life of African Americans in Indiana.
That's a great question. There was one follow-up that I wanted to jump in, and then we'll leave the topic of the KKK alone. Did we know, is there any reports or any information that whether it was KKK members themselves or the sympathizers causing a lot of conflict for when a march would pop up or when a planned speech would pop up? I know there's resistance and stuff.
You mean in Indiana or around the country in general?
We'll keep it to Indiana.
No, I don't know that there's any evidence that it was the Klan by his visits in the 60s. And I don't know that there was a whole lot of resistance to him coming, quite frankly. That I'm not sure about. As you see, there were 4,000 people at Cato Tabernacle. I don't know that there were 4,000 people outside demonstrating, protesting, or making it difficult for that event to happen. And as you see at the airport, the cadre of people that came to greet and welcome him was multiracial, and included elected officials and others. I can't identify actually at the moment all of who was in that photograph. So I guess for everyone who was against him, there was somebody who was for him. But did they come out and speak out to the point that there were, say, armed resistance and protests outside of an event? I have not dug that deep as a historian and a scholar into what happened when he was here, but nothing is rising all the way up to the surface that we're talking about it all the time. Like, say, him attending the monster meeting or being friends with compatriots with Reverend Brown, if you will.
So we have a few more questions from the audience. If I think it's it's paced down a little bit, but we have some more time for sure. So if anyone else has any more questions, please drop them in. We do have some questions specifically about an individual person or a church, that I'll ask those right now. We have one guest that just was curious about my Mount Zion Church in Gary, Indiana. Do you know what denomination that was or anything else?
I don't know off the top of my head what that is, but if you shoot me an email, I could do a little digging and find out about what that is. And that's
I'm
S
also
Hall at
sure. Yeah,
indianahistory.org. S
I'm also,
Hall.
I'm
I
also
never
sure our
changed
background
my
people can Google that too, and maybe we'll have an answer
right.
before we close
Yeah,
out.
I don't know. It's there. He spoke here, St. James, St. John's Missionary Baptist Church, where Andrew Brown was a pastor. I think that one picture is identified as Mount Zion Baptist Church. So some of the events they were not always church related. Doesn't mean that there weren't other clergy involved
Right.
in the meetings or NAACP meetings, voter registration meetings. I know that a lot of the visits that he made into Cleveland in particular were voter registration drives,
Right.
to help people to register to vote and encourage them to vote, just the same as in the South. There were different types of restrictions where people didn't feel that they could, not just in the South, but also in the Midwest and the Northeast.
Thank you. We had another question about a person attached to a church or religious affiliation. Someone asked if you could talk a little bit more about the relationship you mentioned with the Reverend of Notre Dame. I remember there's a
Right.
picture with that.
He went there to speak. I don't know the breadth of details, but he did go there to speak, and that will require some more unpacking. As many of you may or may not know, I'm new to Indiana, so my scholarship is still pretty fresh on King in Indiana, the legacy of King in Indiana. I know much more about his legacy, say in Cleveland, Ohio. But as I was doing my research to find out where he actually was here, because we don't have as many photographs as I thought we would. But the reason we don't have as many photographs as I thought we would is because he didn't come here nearly as often as he went to Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Montgomery, Albany, Georgia, all throughout the South. But I didn't know, and that's when I learned how often he was in Pittsburgh, Philly, New York, and then abroad. He was traveling abroad quite a bit. He went to the UK, he went to Paris, he went to Oslo to receive his Nobel Peace Prize. And when you look at this journal, you could see him in the course of a week, 5 different places, only 7 days in a week, traveling by car, by train, by bus, and by airplane. It's rather fascinating to see the level of movement, how he accomplished all the things that he did in that time, and slept, and made it home to a family, and preached at his church. He was awfully busy. So, not to suggest that he didn't have a relationship here or that it wasn't important for him to come here, but definitely the southern states were important to him to plan and organize. But then he was going to northern states also doing fundraising. Many of these trips were looking for allies, supporters, and they were fundraising efforts to help get he and others out of jail after protests. when he was arrested, in letter from a Birmingham jail is great to read, as well as other organizers. It wasn't just him that was important to the movement, and they were being arrested for peaceably assembling.
So we have a memory question, if you are able
Okay.
to share any. Someone said that you mentioned that your father was at the March on Washington. Do you know if he has a favorite memory of that day?
Hmm.
Or any
Um,
stories you remember
I
when he
can
talked about?
retell the stories. Sadly, my father's no longer with us, but he took pictures. My father was uh, a lay photographer. Um, so I do have images. I have a button that he brought back from the march. He took a bus with a group of people from our church, which was Siloam Presbyterian Church, and his fraternity, which is Phi Beta Sigma, and he went to Washington. I was a baby, an infant, so I did not go. My mother did not attend. Um, so that's my memory in of listening to my father retelling and showing me the photographs of what it looked like with people with their placards. And it was a very warm day, and my father was very conservatively dressed always, but a button-up shirt. I think it might have been short sleeved, and he always wore a hat. Um, he might have even had a tie. I'm not even sure. I have to go back and look at these photographs. And they went, and with DC only being 4 hours, I grew up in New York City. They came back the next day. I mean, the same day, later that day. Um, you said about remembrances. I remember the day he was assassinated. I was a very young girl. Back then, unlike young people out there watching today, we did not have cell phones. We did not have internet. We did not have cable. Some had color TV. We only had black and white. And at that time, we only had one. And I was a very little girl. And when you were a kid, you were the remote. You changed the channels. But there was nothing else to watch. This was on TV on every channel, on every station. But I remember watching my parents being exceptionally sad and crying. And we watched it on the news as long as it was showing. Um, I hear the retelling, the same that they did when President Kennedy was assassinated as well. And people were glued to the television that had it, or glued to a radio, which radios, my mother had one that was as big as this cell phone, with a transistor radio with one earbud on a string, just like some of our phones still do, listening to what was happening and being exceptionally sad and saddened and fearful of what was next, what was going to come after that, and watching the funeral. And as a little girl, reading the Ebony. And I think, a year older than his youngest daughter, Bernice. And I wanted to know, at that point, I had yet to actually really deal with death, that I was really knowledgeable of. And why was she crying? And what happened? And being absolutely fascinated by why someone who could do that to him, because I saw him on the news. I watched some of his speeches at that point in the news, but I heard some of the rhetoric that was coming out of the news that wasn't always positive as well. So those are some of my, I guess, my strongest ones. And then I could say, going forward, my college roommates were, their father being friends, I shared in their father's stories, who I did know, and photographs. And in my life, I did get to meet Bernice King, um, Martin III, as well as Daddy King, Dr. King's father. I was, I think, 15 in Chicago at a conference with my godparents, and I got to hear him preach at a Sunday service for this organization's conference. So not really close, but there. And so his legacy is important. It's something I know about, and studied. I have, I dropped it somewhere in here, but a children's book that someone made that is just bought a second copy. That's great photographs that I had as a gift from that November, where I could learn and sit and learn more about him, his family, his life, his legacy.
Those are great memories to pass on to all of us
Yeah,
and everyone else in the
yeah,
family as the young
yeah.
people grow up. So we have
And I
two.
have been to the Lorraine Motel. It's now a museum, and it's awfully powerful. Since we are in a museum setting here, it's awfully powerful to actually stand, could only stand there for a few seconds, and the actual spot across the street where James Earl Ray was using his rifle to assassinate him. And then I also have, last kind of put it in a ball of continuity, the late Congressman Louis Stokes was the chair of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and he was my friend, my mentor, a bonus dad to me, and I curated an exhibit and got to talk to him about that experience of being the only person in Congress to cross-examine James Earl Ray.
So thank you again for sharing those memories. We have a couple of questions in relationship to a particular speech that was given in Indianapolis after the death of Martin Luther King Jr. I want to make sure that we touch upon that, but talk about the positives and negatives of the speech by Robert F. Kennedy on the night that we all learned that Dr. King was assassinated and he was speaking to a group of people in Indianapolis. We don't have to spend too much time on it because we still have a ton of other questions, but I just wanted to make sure
Okay,
we touched on this from the audience.
sure. It's something that happened. I find it a fascinating narrative when I came to Indiana, that so much emphasis is placed on that moment, that event, the speech, and the speech is fabulous. But on the other side, and it's not a derision, but what else would he have said? What else should he have said? He too had experienced the loss, a personal loss of someone being assassinated. Um, did it take courage to come into the community nonetheless on a scheduled visit? So he didn't step out of a comfort zone and go someplace where he wasn't already planning to be. So he was planning to be in that neighborhood, to be on Broadway, to be in the park, to do a campaign speech. So he had no foresight that he would be delivering this message. Many in his campaign didn't want him to speak, but he said, I'm going to, because he understood, he'd lived this. And they didn't always get along, and they didn't always see eye to eye, and they didn't always agree, but they also worked together, and their relationship was evolving even at that point. So I think the hardest part of, so I think it's an exceptional moment. And I have recently been in discussions with the local Kennedy King Museum and on how do you preserve that legacy and how do you tell that story? And I say, my opinion as a scholar is the evidence doesn't bear out that his message quelled the violence, particularly on Indiana Avenue, which was not side by side. We didn't have social media to, you had to actually go home, pick up a phone that came out of a wall to say, don't do it. People were hurt and so some places did have eruptions of violence and other cities did not. And we just happened to be the one that did not. And so I don't know that even if he were alive today, that he would want the burden or bear the burden of that weight of saying that a whole community didn't do it because of a speech that he gave that day that everybody didn't get the opportunity to hear. Um, and one way to look at that is also the coverage that came thereafter, particularly out of the Indianapolis Recorder. So I'm not suggesting that those words weren't powerful and meaningful. I just don't know that they had the level of power that we now like to attribute in hindsight in the Wayback Machine 50 plus years ago.
Right. So we had two questions that were interesting that I'm going to mesh into one. And
Okay.
then if we have a minute before we have to close out today, we'll ask another question. But we had someone ask, we understand why he was traveling in the United States to get people to register to vote, to share a message. But what was the point of traveling to the UK? Obviously, he was overseas to get his Nobel Peace Prize. You talked about India. What was the point of that? And obviously, that costs money. So was there fundraising attached to it? And how did the funds come to send King, and if anyone else was with him, to travel?
I wish I had all the answers to that question, but I don't. My scholarship is not that in depth. But one of the reasons to go, we forget that it's a global community. Things are happening around the world that affect us, and what happens here affects them. So all leaders, all movements have people who are supporters, are going through some of the same things or similar things. And his words of encouragement, his words of advice are helpful. And in matters of legislation, especially in human rights, we have always seen where, like, we have sanctions right now. You know, a country is violating human rights, blah, 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 blah. The US government, individuals are supportive, and we may have legal sanctions and personal sanctions. If you look at the South Africa and anti-apartheid movement, it went worldwide. Free Nelson Mandela movement and anti-apartheid was not just a South African movement, but it became a global movement just the same. So people being concerned about what was happening to African Americans in America showed their concern. They invited him there to show allyship. He went to meet with Gandhi. He learned about his teachings, and others who were showing support and possibly money and sponsorships just the same, as any other leader that is moving around, not just their local environs, but this was a worldwide, the world was watching, particularly after 4 little girls were killed in Birmingham, Alabama, when now I'm losing it, it's getting old, but when Bull Connor was sicking dogs and hoses on children and protesters in the children's marches in Alabama, the world was watching. And this was really early television news, where the Vietnam War, what was happening to the Freedom Riders, what was happening to marchers and people trying to register to vote, the killing of 4 innocent young little girls on a Sunday morning at church. People outside of America wanted to hear from him, wanted to hear what was happening, wanted to show support and share.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering everyone's all over the place questions.
It's okay.
Obviously, Dr. King has traveled all over the place, and so there has been some questions about how to find his travel log and locations of his papers. If you're super interested in that, you can reach back out to Susan. You can spend some time on Google, spend some time on Archives Grid. These are all great ways to find where some of the papers are. The caveat to manuscript collections is they kind of go everywhere sometimes.
The Stanford University is a big keeper of the keys. Auburn, the library in Atlanta, Auburn, I think it's the Auburn Research Library. They have a number of items and things. And you don't have to just look at King's papers. You know, there's SELC, Snidth papers, John Lewis papers, Bay of Rustin. There's lots of books. There's lots of A. Philip Randolph. Fred Shuttlesworth is Wyatt T. Walker, Ella Baker, Diane Nash. There are a lot of Stokely Carmichael. There are a lot of inroads to get those answers because it's not just neatly in one place and in one box. Stanford University is where I found the travel diary, travel log. And it just went by month by month by month by month. So then newspapers.com and elsewhere to look at, let me see what more can I find out. Hoosier History Chronicles, to look at the newspapers for the day, the state library, our library. I mean, there are lots of inroads and intersections to get to those answers, and it's not neatly in one space or one place.
So to round off our evening celebrating Dr. King, I'm gonna, in a short sentence answer, because we're just at that time, what is your favorite way to celebrate Dr. King on his federal holiday, or a recommendation for people to do? I know you mentioned to me earlier that if you were home, you would be enjoying some champagne.
Right, but today I have water. One of my favorite ways is in Cleveland, as well as here in Indianapolis, museums in, I would say, the 2000, late 1990s, started offering a free day to people to come and celebrate and do programs. And so this would allow average citizens to come in and see our exhibits, but also participate in programming. Worked at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We had big concerts and orators and people doing reenactments and things of that nature. Last year, I did a talk last year as well. But during the President Obama administration, he called it a day of service. So it's also another way to learn more about Dr. King, the movement, the struggle. What can we individually and collectively do to do better, be more inclusive, and know that we're not free. No one's free till we're all free. Mm-hmm. And that there's ways to give back. There's ways to help. And what your cause and what your mission is, there are plenty of them. And it's not always about, doesn't have to always be about race, but racism still exists in America. And how do we combat those inequities if we don't know about it? So it's a good day to learn. It's a good day to reflect. It's a good day to read.
Thanks, Susan, for that
Thank
great
you, Lauren.
drive to get us to go out into our community and do some service on Monday's Day of Service, as well as celebrating Dr. King. So thanks again to Susan for today's conversation. We super appreciate us having a moment to sit down and celebrate Dr. King and talk about the moments that he's been in Indiana. So if you'd like to join us in person, we will be free, as I mentioned earlier, on Monday to come in to the museum, check out our exhibits, learn about the power of music. And we do ask that you do advance reservations, but it is a free day, and we will drop the link in the chat for that. And we hope to see you there in your favorite mask if you're close to us. If virtual is more your style, we have more coming to you. We have at the top of the program, we have more history happy hour coming. to join us on February 18th to talk about Black literature. We also have a genealogy 101 workshop coming on Saturday, January 23rd, talking about researching ahead of time, making a plan ahead of time before you go off to an archive to do research or before you send research requests. And we also have a research roundtable on February 6th, talking about Black history is everyone's history. So our National History Day program, where students conduct and share original historical research, has gone virtual this year, and we need your help to judge students' projects at our contest. No previous experience is required, and you don't need to be a teacher, just anyone who really likes history and wants to get help kids be involved. So find out how you can sign up and support our students throughout the state at the link that will be dropped in the chat. And sign up for that at indianahistory.org for more information about this and other virtual offerings coming to an internet connected device near you. So we'll post this conversation to the IHS YouTube channel and our website in the upcoming weeks. In the meantime, if you'd like to know more about cemeteries, fashion, Ohio River pirates, and more, you can watch the replay of previous History Happy Hour conversations in the playlist on our YouTube channel. If you missed your chance to donate or would like to make a further gift to support the Indiana Historical Society, please visit the link in the chat or indianahistory.org/virtual-resources/donate. And your donation will help us to continue to share Hoosier stories and collect Hoosier and more stories about Dr. King. So you'll get an email from us tomorrow morning with all these links and a survey included. The survey should take about 1 minute, and we'd love to know what you thought and how we can make programs like this better. So again, many thanks to Susan. Thank you for joining us this evening. Stay safe and healthy, and we can't wait to see you in the future. Have a good night.